Good morning, everybody. My name is Jesse with ROI Safety Services, and we are doing another weekly free training topic. As I mentioned, I will be doing a weekly topic. This particular week, we are going to talk about hazardous communication, and this really can apply to construction as well as general industry. So let's get started on HAZCOM, hazardous communications. This is one of the most overlooked programs, I think, and at the same time the most dangerous because everybody uses chemicals in the workplace. I don't know of any industry that doesn't have some type of chemical, even if it's just computer programmers. In those locations we have the risk of having batteries or backup batteries that can have acid in them, various other types of chemicals in just about literally in every workplace. I tell me one that doesn't have any kind of chemical or any kind of exposure to something that we need to know about, that we need to have information on. So that's why the name Hazard Communications is so important, and we really need to be responsible in knowing the hazards in our workplace. So we're gonna cover identify the employer's responsibilities. What is the owner, the manager, have to do? What are their role? What is their role in the workplace? What do they need to do? What are actionable items that they need to take in order to be in compliance with HAZCOM? And then identify the components of a HAZCOM program, describe requirements of different types of HAZCOM labels. And really, it comes down to labeling your products and training your employees to read them and understand them. And that's the distinction with this program. We need to really understand the risk when it comes to chemicals. You have chronic exposure, you have long-term or short-term exposure, which would be acute exposure. And so those are really important terms that we need to understand completely, especially if you're dealing with any kind of silica or lead or any toxin in your workplace, welding gases, stainless steel, so many different kinds of exposures that we need to be aware of. And we don't want to find out after the fact, right? After when we're in our 50s and 60s and 70s that, oh, you have cancer because you worked with silica or whatever chemical. So describe the requirements of the different kinds of labeling, locate pertinent information about the chemicals on the label, reading them and understanding, hey, this particular product is corrosive or it's toxic. We need to be able to identify that and understand it and truly just understand what it means to my health. Now, there was a new uh, revision to the HAZCOM program. It's been a while. I think it's been maybe 15 years. It's been quite some time, but I will cover that. I don't see this having any impact in today's uh, industries in terms of not being compliant. Very rarely do I have an issue with this, but we are required to have GHS HAZCOM material in the workplace. So that means you have to have the pictograms, the safety data sheets, and you have to have the training. This does not, uh, this absolutely doesn't exempt anybody. So there's no like, oh, I don't have to do this because I only have 3 people. You have to do this if you have, just one person. You need to be compliant with this requirement. If you're a one-man lab, and you are servicing the public or your clients, you still need to have safety data sheets in that one-man lab because you have chemicals, and you may have people that come to your facility and drop off stuff, and they may need to want to know what chemicals you have or what am I potentially being exposed to. I know that's an absurd example, but it could happen. We need to have uh, safety data sheets and training for every chemical that we're dealing with. Now, there's 7 major elements to the new GHS standard that must be complied by each of us, and they're really simple. You just need a safety data sheet. You need to have proper labeling on the container. and training, communication, labeling, placarding. Those are all things that need to get done. The SDS, uh, I again, this has been around a while. Safety data sheets are really easy to come by. This is how you typically do it. You get on your phone and you get on the manufacturer's website, like DuPont, for example, and you put in the type of paint that you need the safety data sheet on, and you can just pull it up. It's so easy. But you absolutely have to have that on file. That's the employer's responsibility. Every single employer in the US has to have a safety data sheet. Now, the manufacturer is required to provide that. And again, there's not that big of a deal in terms of getting it from the manufacturer. If they're out of the country, that could be, a minor problem, but typically it should be very simple to request a safety data sheet from whatever you're doing and whatever products you have, all the way in the construction industry to aerospace to you name it. Safety data sheets are pretty easy to get these days. But you got to have the safety data sheet, you have to have training, and you have to make sure that everything is labeled properly. Those are really the core requirements of implementing a hazardous communication program, and you have to have a documented written program. So you have to have the name of the business, who's responsible for it, who's going to manage your HAZCOM program, the day to day, and who's going to be making sure that everything's labeled and the training is getting done. So this is all spelled out in a very simple, probably 4-page program. I think I did like 4 of them in the last 5 days for various companies, and they're about 3 to 4 pages long. They're not very long, and they're very simple to comply with. So you need to have a list of chemicals in that program, and you need to have where the SDSs are going to be, labeling of containers, and then how are you going to do your training. Very simple program in terms of implementing a program. And this section of the training, we are going to briefly skim over. Again, this training is to give you guys a good idea of what you need to do. And this is not a very difficult program, but it's not super easy in the sense that you need to have some kind of inventory. So if you have a machine shop and you have, if you got 400 different chemicals laying around, it's a good time to take inventory and do some housekeeping. Okay, get everything in order, clean everything up, and make sure that you get your safety data sheets for every product. You absolutely need to have one for every product. If you have 20 different kinds of oil, you need 20 different SDSs unless you get one from the same vendor that has those different grades identified on that safety data sheet, which is quite possible. Some manufacturers, they'll make a red dye diesel, and maybe they'll call it 5 different things based on the industry they're delivering it to or the different types of grades, and it really is essentially the same product, and they just have all of those names on that safety data sheet. That is pretty common for different types of chemicals. For paints, unfortunately, paint, you're going to need a safety data sheet for each type of paint, and that could be a problem if you have 500 different paints. I have a lot of clients that do industrial painting and aerospace painting, and it's a pain in the butt. That's no lie, but you got to do this. This is a requirement. Now, you don't necessarily need to have a hard copy of every SDS. I think most of our clients still carry the hard copy. I don't necessarily recommend that, just because they change so frequently and they get damaged very easily. So I do recommend keeping everything on a digital copy on a network, somewhere where you can access from various locations within your organization, and of course outside of your organization. They need the HAZCOM program and the SDSs, they need to be accessible. They need to be available for anybody who asks. Each safety data sheet should have 16 parts. Okay, this is where the employer has to train their employee on how to read a safety data sheet. I'm not going to teach you how to do that today. That is going to cost you, because this is where we get into the weeds of training. And I'm going to tell you that every employee has to know how to read it and understand it. And if they don't, that's a problem, because they could easily say, I didn't know how to read it. I didn't know I was dealing with nitric acid or caustic soda or lead powder, and now I have these problems. I was never trained on how to read a safety data sheet. Employer, it is your responsibility to make sure that they know how to read it. Okay? If you need help with that, call ROI. So here's an example of poor labeling. I like showing examples because it really shows what really goes on in these particular shops. This shop is a casting facility. They do castings. They do very large castings, and they use a lot of oil and cleaners and all kinds of stuff. And they're using a geyser bottle to store. I don't know what it is. I think it's a lubricant, but it should have a label on it. Okay. And you can see next to it, there's some kind of primer paint, but everything needs to be labeled correctly. This could be a problem for whoever this is. So everything needs to be labeled and identified. Let me go back here. This particular area is a bag house, and in those drums is bag house material that is spent. I I don't know why there's no labels on there, but there needs to be a label on there. It could be waste label, it could be whatever the product name is. I don't know, but it should have some kind of label on there. And even you can even say that this drum that probably has some powder in it and other miscellaneous things in it. Why there should be a label on there? There should be a label on anything that has any kind of hazardous material. Here's another example of a water bottle, and then of course this looks like a Coke bottle. And then, like I said, there's 16 parts to a safety data sheet. I am not going to provide that training for you today. That is outside of the scope of what we're doing. But what I would encourage you to do is if you don't have a program now, you need to develop one. You need to get a safety data sheet for every piece of chemical you have, every product you carry, and you can get that from the vendor. And then you need to put a program together. Programs are really simple. I can help you with that. I can help you do your inventory. All of these things we're doing day in and day out. Not a big deal for me, not a big deal for anyone on my staff. It's very simple, but you don't do it every day like we do. So give me a call if you need help here. We can absolutely create safety data sheets for you as well. We do quite a few safety data sheets per year, so we can actually help you with the whole package. But we want to provide you with the tools at least to understand your risk. If you don't have a program in place, if you're not doing any labeling, you definitely are going to be at risk. So you need to have a designated person who's going to manage the program. What kind of labeling are you going to use? Who's going to be responsible for that labeling? Who's going to check it? Who's going to make sure it's legible? These are really good labels right here. Most vendors are going to have labels with the GHS pictograms on it, and they're going to have all of this information on the label. I have not seen anyone in 10 years use any other type of labeling other than the current GHS standards, even stuff that has been exported. So this is not a problem anymore. What is a problem is training our people, having safety data sheets available, and making sure we have a secondary labeling system in place. And these are all processes that you can put into place in-house. Whatever process you're using now, it's a good time to check it and make sure you're doing everything. At least check it annually. And the process is real simple. Purchase the material, request a safety data sheet from the vendor, get the material, inspect the material, make sure the SDS is with it, put the SDS in a binder or scan it into your network, and then train your folks on these safety data sheets, how to read them, how to access them, and understand the different types of hazards that these chemicals can have. Is there a chronic hazard? Is there a short-term hazard or an acute hazard? Is there anything I should concern myself with, any symptoms with this material? Your employees have a right to know. That is a right that they have. And if you're not providing this for them, that could be a big problem for you as the employer. Okay. Now, they need to have training. It needs to be done regularly. Every time you get a safety data sheet might be a little too much, but if you get a safety data sheet that has new hazards, yes, you need to train them on that. If it's the same type of product that you keep bringing in, then you just need to do training one time unless there's something that changes. Let's say you're bringing in caustic soda day in and day out, and all of a sudden you bring in nitric acid or something hydrofluoric acid, something really bad, or chlorine gas. Absolutely, you're going to want to do training on that. So anytime a new hazard is brought into your facility, you need to do training on. This area here, the types of labeling, I'm not going to cover, although there are different types. There's NFPA labels. There's different fire department, cities and towns and wherever you're at across the country, they actually may require you to have different kinds of labeling on your buildings. So that is something that would be more site specific, like in certain cities in California, you actually have to put an NFPA diamond on the outside of your building. Not every city requires that. I would say most of them do. But the only way to know that is either get an inspection and be reactive and potentially have to pay fines, or you investigate and get on a local website to make sure what your local fire department requirements are. So again, you got HazCom labeling. You need to have that. Again, your vendors are going to be pretty good on this, spot on. I don't see any issue with that. But reading it and understanding it needs to be communicated to every employee. So going through the labeling system, help them understand what the flammable means. So during the training, you would need to go through these 9 different types of pictograms with your employee and explain what each one means. A video is fine for something like this, although you still must go over site-specific chemicals that you have. But reading a label, understanding the NFPA and the GHS information can easily be done in a video. I do not recommend any videos, but it's something that you can do. NFPA is supposed to be something that was going to go away, but it has not. It's still, like I said, in certain counties and cities, they are still requiring NFPA diamonds on the outside of their buildings. And then that, again, this is specific training I'm not going to cover today, but you got to evaluate that within your own facility. And here are some other types of placarding. If you're transporting hazardous chemicals, you need to have DOT training. You need to understand the placarding requirements. That's another type of training that needs to be done. Here you go. Here's some other examples. Some more examples. So this PowerPoint is actually our full-blown HazCom training program. And when we do training at our customer sites, we go over everything in detail. And there's a lot to cover. There is a lot to cover. The class takes about an hour, and we want to make sure that we cover site-specific information and requirements. But I do this not to give you an exhaustive training class, to give you an awareness that you should take managing chemicals in your site super serious, because the risk is not just short-term, it's long-term. It truly is a long-term risk. I have clients that do silica handling, lead, chromic acid, stainless steel, and various other kinds of toxic chemical that absolutely could be short-term and long-term exposure. So we really want to get ahead of this and do a hazard assessment at our location. ROI Safety Services will come to your site wherever you are and do a site assessment and help you with these programs, help you get to a position where you're going to be in a proactive place for your employees so that they'll never have a reason to file an OSHA complaint or complain about their working conditions, because you're going to be way ahead of it. I encourage you to do that. I'm the owner of ROI, and I'm here to support industry, general industry, construction. We work with refineries, with you know distribution centers, you name it. We will come to your site and support you. Give me a call directly. I'm always available. My my cell number is 714-520-1608. Call me directly. I'm here to support you. God bless you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.